Good morning, Professor. I'm really excited to present my presentation on the investment simulation that I've been playing for the last 3 months. So let's begin. So I will begin with a little bit of simulation overview. So we were given $100,000 to invest over a 3-month period. We had to navigate real-time conditions. So for example, market volatility, macroeconomic uncertainty, or any political news that could change the market, and accordingly we had to invest. We also had to make strategic decisions. We needed to know our capital allocation, asset allocation, risk adjusted returns. We needed to know strong knowledge of beta, alpha, MER fees, standard deviation, and Sharpe ratio. Next, the purpose of the analysis was, for example, the main objectives were, reflect on investment decision making process. So we wanted to, we need to know that we're not just making any random investments. We're making uh, an intelligent or a calculated approach when we are making a portfolio. We are looking at all the metrics and then, making a portfolio. Next, we wanted to define our investor profile and our risk tolerance, also our time horizon, and and we wanted to assess portfolio alignment with our defined profile. We did not want to have a portfolio which was not aligning with our profile. So, like I said, we use beta, standard deviation, Sharpe ratio. We also evaluated MER and risk-adjusted returns. And lastly, I would say, we identified mistakes, constraints, and key lessons. So investor profile, let me begin. So my investor profile was, I'm low to medium. I have 5 to 10 years of medium time horizon. My investment approach is stable growth. I'm not looking for high growth. I want fixed income and I want my capital to be preserved. I don't want it. Uh, I don't want, like I said, main goal is capital preservation and stable growth. So, uh, so accordingly, as you can see, my priorities, it says capital preservation, diversification, downside protection, strong preference for ETFs. Another reason for why I had strong preference for ETFs over mutual funds was, mutual funds have MER fees, and I'm not willing to pay MER fees. Also, I want my portfolio to be highly liquid. So I should be able to sell them at any point of time so that, I can rebalance and, capitalize on opportunities in the market that might arise. So my target portfolio strategy was, I don't know if you can see it on the presentation, but it was 50% bonds, 40% equities, and 10% cash reserves. Portfolio that I constructed was using a role-based framework where each fund had a specific function. So, for example, VFV served as as a core US equity growth engine. It provided me exposure to large cap American companies. VXUS added international diversification. This helped me reduce geographic concentration risk. And VIG contributed defensive, dividend-focused equity exposure. On the fixed income and bond side, BND provided me broad US bond market stability, while I would say BNDX offered me global bond diversification with currency risk hedged. KIP was included as a inflation protection instrument. And lastly, I would say SGOV was used as more like a cash reserve and short-term shock absorber. So the principle that I used here was the funds were based on, their role within the portfolio, not the return. So I wasn't really chasing the return. I selected the funds based on the role, and each holding contributed to my overall portfolio balance. Next, I will take you to my decision-making journey. So, my strategy has evolved throughout the simulation. In the early phases, I focused more on, stocks such as Johnson& Johnson, Lockheed Martin. These choices, reflected security selection bias, and it also resulted in concentration risk. Next, so when I started learning during my learning phase, I started to begin understand the importance of diversification and asset allocation, risk-adjusted returns, and so that was more of my learning phase. So then I started investing in more uh, uh, XEF, more ETFs, more mutual funds. For example, I invested in VFIX, but at the same time, I still did not know what I was doing. So I knew that ETFs and mutual funds were better than investing in individual stocks, but I still did not know how to align them in my portfolio. So the major shift occurred when I adjusted a portfolio level, framework. So I've started focusing on asset allocation, capital allocation, risk-adjusted metrics, and the interaction between assets and the individual securities. So, like I said, in the final phases, my focus mainly became ETFs because I did not want to pay more MER fees, and it closely aligned with my investor profile. So, this whole evolution shows the different stages I went through during this game. So the next is current portfolio snapshot. So, like I said, I had an initial capital of 100,000. The current value of my investment is $97,800. So that's an approximate loss of 2.2K and a 2.18% reduction in my portfolio. This is where I currently stand. So next I will be talking about the holding level performance of my my assets. So at the holding level, the primary contributors to the losses were pretty much BND, BNDX, and VFE. And this was largely due to rising interest rates and equity market softness. But also, I would say that I just rebalanced my portfolio really late, so I could not, potentially, enjoy the 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 effects of a portfolio like this because I invested at the last moment. I did not give it enough time. On the other hand, even in the short time, VIG, TIP, and SGOV were, stable, and some of them were moderately positive. So they were kind of like fulfilling their defensive and protective roles. With that being said, importantly, there was no single holding that caused outsides damage. Losses were macro driven, and they were macro driven, and also they were driven by my late rebalancing approach. So this does indicate that my portfolio is correct. It's just that I made some bad decision. Number one could be like I made my portfolio late. And number two, there was some macroeconomic conditions too. So a little bit of both. Uh, so that's about it. Okay, the next part was the risk analysis of my current portfolio. So, from a risk perspective, my portfolio behaved as designed. The beta is designed 0.67, which indicates that the portfolio was about 33% less volatile than the broader market. The portfolio volatility was around, 7.6%, which is roughly half of a typical equity market. The Sharpe ratio of my portfolio was really low, but, that was never really my goal. Uh, this could, it was never really my goal because my goal was more on fixed income, and I had a big chunk of my portfolio was in bonds and cash reserves. So that's one of the biggest reasons why my Sharpe ratio wasn't that high. And it was also due to a weak bond environment right now. The bond market is weak right now. So overall, my portfolio reflects more like external conditions rather than structural flaws. So there's several lessons from the simulation that I learned. First, I would say asset allocation is the primary driver of portfolio outcomes. Second, I would say, early decision matters. You know, Especially in a simulation like this, which is only 3 months, you should know what your investor profile is. You should know, you know, which assets are you looking for, what's your risk tolerance, what's your time horizon, and accordingly, invest. and construct a portfolio. Time is limited. Uh, risk-adjusted metrics, for example, provide deeper insight than probably reward returns. So it's important when investing in a fund that you look at the risk-adjusted returns. For example, you look at the Sharpe ratio, you look at the Sortino ratio, you look at the standard deviation, you look at the beta. Also, you should not be, excessive rebalancing can reduce the compounding effects. In my case, I was rebalancing. At first, I did not know what to do. Then I started rebalancing. And in the beginning, I still didn't know how to rebalance. So you need to have a strategy in place before you can rebalance. And if you don't know that, you're gonna lose all your money. Also, another thing I learned was, you know, if not everybody will be willing to pay a high MER fees when investing in mutual funds. So it's a personal decision for me. I decided not to buy any mutual fund because of the MER fees, and now the mutual fund aligned with my portfolio. And lastly, I would say, the most important thing is patient and disciplined execution. So, these are as important as I would say, critical knowledge. I would say patience and disciplined execution is at the same level. So, with that being said, this portfolio was designed for 5 to 10 years. So, even though I am, I have a 2.12% loss right now in the last 3 months, I'm pretty sure in the next 5 to 10 years, I will gain a 4 to 5% increase. So, next, I'll be talking about why my performance lagged. This is in continuation with the lessons learned. So, the first thing is it's important to address, you know, what was the most significant factors leading to that. Like I discussed, it was, late alignment. My portfolio only became fully aligned with my balanced investor profile, like in the last 15 to 20 days of the whole simulation. Second, I would say, as I've mentioned, the 3 month horizon period was too short for a balanced bond heavy portfolio to demonstrate its strength. So that was one of the biggest reasons, If I had more time, I'm pretty sure this portfolio would have done well. And third, I would say early concentration, in individual stocks increased volatility and weakened early performance. And then I would say another reason why, my performance lag was, unfavorable bond market, like I've discussed before. This was mainly driven by, rising interest rates and which negatively impacted fixed income holdings pretty much. And lastly, I would say frequent rebalancing, which I've already discussed with you guys. Uh, like I said, balance, you should know what you're doing before investing. If you do not know, it's going to be a big loss for you and you're going to lose all your money. So make sure you know your investor profile, make sure you know the risk adjusted returns, make sure you know what are your goals, whether it's growth, whether it's income, whether it's stability, whether it's capital preservation, and accordingly construct your portfolio. Thank you so much, and that's about it.